Some stories are buried, others are erased. Each tale you hear is either true or spun from fiction. It's up to you to decide. Subscribe if you haven't. Dim the lights. Let's begin. Gluckly Intro. In a snowy town that doesn't exist on most maps, something was made that should never have worked, let alone lived. 1. Not every story is true, but some are real. This one comes from a snowbound town tucked into the crooked ribs of the Austrian Alps, a place called Grefwald where roofs wear frost like fur and goats are born with legs of uneven length to climb the slopes. Grefwald has no train station, no cathedral, just a post office that closes when the postmaster drinks too much Zerbenschnaps, a pine cone liqueur brewed by old men who won't say where. It's where the clockmaker lived. Though he wasn't a clockmaker, not really. People didn't bring watches to him for repair. That's just the closest the town, where everyone knew everyone and everything they did could come to assigning him both a profession and a name. Today you might call him an eccentric, or an inventor. One of those people who fall out of the sky with ideas too early for the world to use. Sometimes they push us forward. Sometimes they dry up like husks and blow away. He didn't live in the house his parents left him. That stood across the lane, shutters bowed, stove rusted, full of silence. Instead he stayed in the two-tiered garage, a workshop below, a hayloft-sized room above. He slept in an old sled lined with wool blankets and a pillow stuffed with pine shavings. Said it reminded him of being pulled through the forest by his mother, long ago, before his father's horse went lame and everything went still. He was not a grieving man, not social, not dull. If anything, he was a busy man, always thinking things, drawing those things, then bringing them, somehow, to life. His first creations came in his teens, when his parents were still alive. He built crickets, small ones lacquered bright green. He let them loose by the dozens and neighbours began waking to their high mechanical songs, but out of season, out of place, out of patience. One old woman stepped on 3 in a single night. Others began paying children a few pfennig each to collect the fragments and drop them, like warnings at his door. So he started painting them white and pale ice blue to blend with the snow. They didn't last long, a few weeks maybe, just prototypes. He once gave a grandfather clock legs, real legs, carved from a broken rocking horse. One snowy evening it leapt off the bench and bolted. An old man swore he chased it halfway through Grefwald before it found its rhythm and ran like a hound, chasing something only it could see. It was never found. Then he built birds, pink ones first, then purple ones that perched in trees and sang like wind-up music boxes. The town didn't mind those. Girls called them romantic. Boys said they helped them sleep. Good for summer, but dangerous in winter. So he made dogs to protect the birds. Children had started throwing stones. At the approach of a child, the dogs' mechanical tails would stiffen, their heads would lower, their engines would growl. Then came birds that howled, dogs that chirped. And finally came the girl. 2. He didn't build her to replace anyone. He built her for the oldest reason of all. One Adam would understand. He built her because he wanted company, and all the real women in town wanted real men, with real jobs, real hobbies, time, energy to spend on them. He had none of those things. He'd never felt quite real himself. Her name was Gluckly the Little Bell. Her body was carved from pine and linden, padded with quilt batting and a strange paste, half wax, half plumber's putty. Her skin dented under a fingertip, but could be smoothed again with warmth and patience. It shimmered like egg cream. Her eyes were glass, but not ordinary. Their pattern came from a teacup he'd once seen in Smolensk. Russian bone porcelain shot through with faint gold veins under the glaze. She didn't run on a key, not like a toy. Each night, the clockmaker would fold open a small panel in her back, 2 hinged doors like saloon shutters or the wings of a chapel, and type a phrase into the brass-framed typewriter embedded in her spine. A Rheinmetall KST, German-made, heavy, reliable. Just one phrase, typed slowly. It had to be the same each night. If it wasn't, she would forget the day. If it was too long, she would twitch. If it was nonsense, she would cry. Afterwards, he plugged her into an old lamp socket using a black and white fabric-wrapped cord that hummed softly when it worked. Her body would warm. Her chest would rise, not with breath, but with air drawn into 2 small bellows tucked beneath her ribs. Her exhalations escaped through a narrow set of fluted brass tubes, like a church organ choking on a whisper. When she sighed, it sounded like an apology. When she gasped, the dogs and birds startled and flew to the rafters to hide. 3. She sat for 15 days. On the 16th, she spoke. Before that, she used blocks, old children's toys, to spell her name. Glockli. She liked the umlaut, pressed the dots with pride. Her voice was breathy, airy, more wind than word, but it had cadence, shape. One neighbour girl said it sounded like a ghost who'd learned manners. She asked questions, not just about heaven or God or death, though those came, but also, why does your food smell good but turn to waste? Why do you snore when you sleep? Why do you drink wine if it makes you sway? Why do dogs look backward before lying down? Why do you write letters and never send them? Why do some people love things that hurt them? Why does nobody look up at the stars if they're so special? She found a dead bee lying on a matchbox. This one's asleep. Don't wake it. She shooed the fake birds when they tried to perch on her shoulder. They're not real, she said once. Just stories made of feathers. The clockmaker laughed until he coughed, then looked at her quizzically, a little afraid. 4. But the real animals liked her, and they came. Only the brown ones, squirrels, deer, dogs with rust-coloured coats, wolves. They gathered near the workshop at dusk, pressing their noses to the low windows. Once, 5 wolves sat in a row like pupils listening to a lesson. Gluckli placed her hand on the glass but didn't open it. The villagers grew uneasy. They whispered about demons with porcelain skin. They remembered old fairy tales they pretended to forget. At first, they noticed only the wolves. Then they saw the girl behind the window, drawing on the fogged glass with one finger, wolf shapes, moon shapes. The clockmaker had crossed an invisible line, from odd to unsettling, from eccentric to something that made them shift in their sleep. So they went to the priest, and the priest came. He entered holding a holy book. He left with it unopened. He and Gluckli sat for hours. She asked him if angels had teeth. He said yes. She asked if they chewed their prayers. He didn't answer. She asked if God built time with his hands, or if he just breathed and the clock began. The priest flipped pages in his book, never landing. Fanned them like a card trick, he cleared his throat too often. His boots squeaked. He stared at the stove, as if it might give him something to say. She asked what sins look like when they're babies. He said nothing, but his knuckles turned white around the book's spine. 5. When the villagers asked what happened, he said he was working on it, then scurried back into the church. Or maybe he dragged his feet. A boy down the road fell in love with her, of course. He said her laugh made his ribs itch. They kissed once behind the blacksmith's shed. He swore her lips were warm and her breath smelled like cedar. He said he could hear ticking inside her when she was near. She told him, "Your heart is louder than mine." He began leaving her things, wooden birds with chipped beaks, crickets carved from pine, their legs uneven, their wings too thick. He'd line them up on her windowsill before dawn, hoping she'd see him as a maker too. Gluckly studied them, then opened the window and knocked them into the snow. One by one, the clockmaker built a monkey next. It mimicked voices, scratched itself, clapped its hands when bored. It tried to answer her once, truly it did. But it only screeched, wild and hollow, as if it thought noise could be meaning. It clapped and bowed like a parody. Gluckly stared at it and whispered, "That's not me," then turned her back forever. The villagers disliked it too, said it was impudent. One night, someone threw a rock through the workshop window. The monkey stopped working soon after. Gluckly didn't mourn it. Maybe the monkey knew it was unloved and turned itself off. If machines can do that. 12 years passed. The clockmaker aged quietly. His hands trembled more, but still found the right keys each night. He never told anyone the phrase, not one, not even Gluckly. The keys were the power of life and death. Sometimes she stood at the edge of the trees, arms behind her back, humming. Sometimes she crouched in the snow and stared at the moon without blinking. Sometimes the villagers said they heard her singing, low and sad, in a language no one knew. Once the mayor's daughter followed the sound. She swore she saw Gluckly dancing in a clearing. 7 brown wolves circled around her, heads bowed like choir boys. Some said she was an angel, some a witch. Others whispered she was not born at all, just dropped from the wooden moon. 6. And then she was gone. The morning was grey and uneventful. The dog didn't bark. The sled bed was empty. The small back panel of her spine lay alone on the workshop table. No footprints in the snow, no signs of forced entry, no note. She was gone. Some say the priest stole her, ashamed of his affection. Some say the boy ran off with her into the woods and froze with a smile on his face. Some say she left of her own will, chasing something even he couldn't invent. The clockmaker never spoke of her again, but he still built out of habit more than hope. Only now he built things that silenced the world. He made bells that rang only when they heard other bells. They rang back with a pitch so soft it drowned the rest out. A clock that ticked inward, not out. He made boxes that hummed with a kind of absence, like padded rooms or snowfall. He built crickets that hissed when someone spoke. Mechanical flowers that hid their faces with their petals when someone walked by. None of these things spoke. He never built another voice. He sat often in his sled, even when not sleeping, staring at the stove until it blinked out. Sometimes he'd move his hands in the air as if assembling something only he could see. Other times, he just sat. And over time, he too grew quiet, stiff, still. People would peer in his windows and say he'd gone wooden himself, that the old man had become his own invention. When he died, it took a doctor from the next town to be sure. The only way they knew for certain was that his hands had stopped building things. They laid him in a box of polished pine, like one of his own, because that's what we do when people go still. We wrap them in wood and bury them in the earth, hoping that something better will grow. As for Gluckly, she must have discovered the sentence the watchmaker hid. What I made me. Was it true or just a well-told lie? Tell us what you believe and why. We know many of you listen late at night, sometimes while drifting off to sleep. Maybe you're wrapped in polar bear blankets, deep in the Arctic dark. Maybe you're swinging in a jungle hammock, wrapped up like a snack. Or maybe you're alone in a quiet room, or so you think. Let us know where you're listening from, and whether this story kept you awake or gave you good dreams. And one more thing. If you know a rare or hidden place, a ruin, an old legend, a forgotten town, share it in the comments. Your suggestion might become part of the Atlas. If you enjoyed wandering these forgotten corners, subscribe and join us again for another journey into the unknown.